Thank you, team. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Allison. So, so the W3C, and then Siteimprove is part of the United Nations Global Compact. We're a global compact company trying to meet those sustainable development goals by 2030, which is pretty exciting for me. So as of 2030, there's supposed to be 17 sustainable development goals for the betterment of the entire world. And so Siteimprove has aligned itself with quality of education, reduced inequalities, and partnerships for the goals, those three goals. And then we are a Danish company globally and based in Toronto as well. So we're actively participating in graphic standards as well as accessibility standards all over the world, especially in Europe as well. So just a quick agenda. What is digital accessibility? What are we talking about? And what is inclusive design, graphic design, UX design, overall coding and development? And then becoming a leader. That's what's so great. How can you become a champion within any work that you do individually or any organization that you would be, where you'd be leading projects? How do you become a leader and a champion for accessibility and people with disabilities? People and needs, we're going to touch upon what those needs are and some common barriers for graphic design. And then an action plan for digital teams. So when I do my work with organizations, whether it's a government or a corporation or a nonprofit organization, anyone that has a digital property, this is my sort of go-to action plan. So I'd love to talk about it, or any thoughts that this is like a design exercise that you can do to make sure that you're hitting those accessibility milestones. Yeah, and then as said, definitely want to leave some Q&A room at the end. So what is digital accessibility? So by and large, it means that websites, mobile applications, desktop applications, kiosks at the airport, anything with an interface that's digital can be perceived, operated, and fully understood without any technical barriers, language barriers, understandability barriers, but people of all abilities and disabilities. So what we're doing is we don't kind of narrow our focus either on just people with disabilities having needs. Some essentially have needs that other folks in the world might not have. But the idea is that we are considering those folks. So regardless of the who's on the other end of the computer, or who's interacting on social media with one of your graphic campaigns, or who's interacting with that interface, we don't know who that is, but we're designing things inclusively just in case so we can by and large reach and meet as many needs as possible. Which leads me to the next point, which is if digital accessibility, whether functionally or through language and content, is the outcome, how do we get there? It's through that inclusive design mindset. So inclusive design is that approach to user experience design that we're trying to achieve for any digital property that takes into consideration the needs, like critical needs, as well as preferences and adaptive strategies of an ability of all users as part of the original design. So anytime you're thinking of creating something new, building an amazing user experience, you're not just thinking of one fully sighted, one fully abled, fully mobile user. You are not narrowing your focus to one or two personas. You're opening things wide up to consider all needs. And we're going to get into sort of a breakdown of those different disability types. But disability is a relative term because there's so much ability there. We'll get into that as well. So what we're saying is, yeah, as long as you sort of consider everyone, as many needs as possible, and design for that in the early stages of a project, then you're doing so much not to think of it later or consider it later or retrofit it back into your designs or code. One thing we want to stress is that there's currently a medical model of disability, and friends. So I work with some of my colleagues have diverse abilities or disabilities that they live with, and they provide these diverse perspectives for our design work as well. And the medical model is that the individual is broken. There's impairments there. They are problematic. They exist with a difficulty, and that's just that. So The traditional view is that disability is caused by some sort of physical, sensory, or mental impairment. It's an impairment, not an ability. The individual is the problem. And then the focus from the medical profession is that someone needs to be cured, or someone is inherently going to be different throughout their lives. And that's absolutely the wrong way to go about things, and one thing that we absolutely want to change. So the difficulty that's posed is down to the individual. That's the medical model of disability. However, what we're here to talk about, and what we're actively doing now, is looking at the fact that society traditionally has been exclusive to people with certain abilities or abilities, disabilities and abilities. So what we're saying is the social model of disability says that the barriers are actually caused by society, being not having those needs, and the physical world and the digital world being considered before. So environmentally, things have been inaccessible. Buildings, language, services, and communications have just not been considerate of those needs. And then organizations have, in the past, been inflexible to do anything about it. Procedures and practices are the way they are. Someone's going to have to adapt to that, not the other way around. And then I left the last one in the middle here on this slide to say that a lot of this starts with, changing the social model of disability means changing people's attitudes. I'm prejudiced against those folks who are sort of stereotyping or sort of discriminating against people who I perceive can't do things. Someone who's blind, they can, they can do stock trading, or, isn't it a website, inaccessible to them, or how do blind people navigate a website, let alone a building, So what we're trying to do, and I think what's exciting, is that we're at the forefront of adopting and sort of going forth to change the social model of disability. So that's where we become leaders. So as individuals, as practitioners, as experts, and highly talented graphic communicators in the visual space, as well as, I'm sure graphics also consider user experience design and interactions. Of course, those all go hand in hand. How do we become a leader? And how do we become a difference in the world now? So I sort of skipped through, just going to lay that right out on the slide. What I like to do when I talk to organizations who are new, to those practitioners, the graphic designers, the developers, the project managers, the stakeholders of the business, or what have you, or those content authors, is to say, let's remember the facts. So people with disabilities use technology, smart TVs, websites, their mobile apps, any software, interactive service screens, as I mentioned, every day, just like all of us. And they have the right to do so freely without barriers, and have equal access to that information, those products and customer services, online as well as in the built environment. That's just a fact. Another note is that people with disabilities use assistive technologies such as mentioned, a screen reader software that sits on your computer or is built into your mobile app that reads aloud. It reads aloud what's on the screen to someone who can't see it. That's an example. Or keyboard is an assistive technology. Zoom magnification software for those who with low vision or need, font sizes and the entire site to be increased. Dark mode, which is changing the colors on a screen to completely a black background with white text or other bright colored text. These are all assistive technologies and hardware and software that have existed for coming up to 30 odd years or more. And then adaptive strategies are things like language, ASL, American Sign Language, British Sign Language, BSL, or I know Pakistani Sign Language. Globally, there's been an adaptive strategy. If you can't hear language, you are adapting to build your own, strategy. So Braille is also an adaptive strategy. So the point is that people enable themselves with the AT or the adaptive strategies to enable themselves. Just because my friend is blind doesn't mean, once he puts a screen reader on or uses his mobile app that's been adapted with those accessibility features, he's good to go. So this allows him to maintain autonomy and independence wherever possible, to do things on his own without help. Sometimes there's help needed, but From a digital perspective, certainly we can achieve that. So if your digital properties, like your website or your mobile app or your social media posts or videos are inaccessible to people, you're causing the barrier. People actually just, they are enabled by the technologies that already exist. So your inaccessible digital property is kind of the last stand, right? It's the thing that's actually causing the barrier. And people are disabled by the lack of available channels, formats, and options. So yeah, if, for instance, as a deaf friend said, in order to enact my credit card, the only way is to call you, then that's disabling me. If you created a way to have me log in and activate my credit card, without having to speak to anyone, that's a more inclusive design that helps me. So fact 3, many people have invisible disabilities, such as cognitive diversity, neurodiversity, which is recognized, or some sort of a lack of attention or focus, or due to an injury, learning difficulties, or what have you. And so they may not self-identify as having a disability. Similarly, people are aging. We're all getting older, and sort of, physically we may degenerate a little. So people may not identify as needing clearer instructions on a website or a more beautiful, elegant design that is clean and functional. Simple, clear, and effective interactions and communications benefit those folks as well, but you won't find them in the disability statistics or in a consensus form. If that makes sense? So the recognition also, and what we're trying to understand, and even in our work in the W3C, to create, WCAG, new WCAG standards that we'll all be abiding by when we get into our, if you want to become an accessibility specialist or want to do accessibility anyway, is that, cognitive needs are being recognized in youth earlier as well as in adults. So let's educate ourselves on what those folks need in order to deliver amazing experiences. And then the final fact, right? So parting from supporting the rights and needs and diverse abilities of people across Canada and the world by law, accessibility and inclusion is just the right of all people to what is essentially good service, good learning, good business, and really the only acceptable standard of living that we will continue to adopt and push as the social model of ability, I would say instead. So inclusive design is the innovation and investment in the future of society. So I've often asked, what's the next tech innovation? Well, it starts with all of us on this call. It's actually reducing those attitudinal barriers, and actually, just quite honestly, the next tech innovation is to make sure that everyone is included and the experience is good for everyone, not poor and not so broken that people can't complete, tasks. Or if that is, I say to organizations, that legally we have a basis and based on people's rights, but it's just good business for your brand to be aligned with reaching as many people as you can. We're doing this to eliminate exclusion. So as leaders and also as champions, when you move into conducting designs or being that amazing talented driver of new experiences from the graphic side, when you work for yourself or for an organization, we want to stop organizations from causing barriers and becoming future ready. We want to champion people's needs and also remind them, I know it's scary. I don't know what people need, or I don't know how people with disabilities use the web. Educate yourself, and that fear just slips away. You now become positive and excited and people-centric whenever you design. So fear of non-compliance with WCAG or the laws in Ontario or Canada can also be a driver. A lot of teams come to us for assistance with our platform and with strategy sessions with me, because they're afraid of not meeting WCAG. Don't worry about it. Let's just focus on people first and get done, and that the rest will follow. You will make your sites and graphic design accessible. And then, feeling overwhelmed. What's exciting is that we can start to build out this knowledge within ourselves and then be the champion in a new place that you will work or you will collaborate. Feeling overwhelmed, there's a lot of work to do sometimes with teams. They've never thought about accessibility. Their website or mobile app is 10 years old. So don't worry about that either. Allow changes to take time. We're all in this together, and let's try to engage with and learn as much as we can to constantly improve. So yeah, so just quickly understanding people and needs. I don't want to, and please, I see some chat questions, and hopefully we have questions and discussion points, but specifics, yeah. So just an overview of the disability types that we want to keep in mind. It's not just obviously blind folks. Visual impairments include low vision, partial sight or full blindness, or deaf blindness. Color blindness is also a thing. Don't just use color like red alone to signify an error. Use an asterisk, or as we discussed, asterisk before, or make sure that whatever is, if color has meaning like warning or error, you also have that written in text. So if someone is colorblind, they can't perceive red. It's gray to them. Just keeping those things in mind. Don't rely on color alone. Deaf or hard of hearing, obviously have as many interactions and information and instructions as possible online, so people don't have to call. Physical disabilities, limited mobility, just remember not everyone uses a mouse. Some folks are using a keyboard, interact with your site. Let's make it keyboard compatible or switch control compatible, which is just 2 buttons, tap, 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 and then an enter button. Cognitive needs, where let's not, from the graphic perspective, I say, don't make things too flashy or move too quickly. Animations are okay if they assist with understanding the information, but flashiness for flash sakes is it can be jarring, and it can be off-putting. So we want to use that in an elegant way, or as required by WCAG, just make sure that any animations or videos can be paused and stopped. And of course, we're doing this now. We've got our closed captions on this call. For videos as well, you have closed captions for those who can't hear the audio, but then you also have, for people with who would rather not sit through a video or can't see the video, you have a text transcript that describes the actions. So there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot of things. I'm trying to think. Other things that from a graphic perspective, yeah, we know that color contrast is key, right? So having high contrast against backgrounds for your text, for buttons, for icons, that, and as I mentioned, dark mode, through a developer would code CSS to make the website switch to dark mode. So you have this beautiful design, but it may be viewed by someone in the reverse, right? Black background instead of white text instead of black. Just another quick note about assistive technologies and adaptive strategies. On this page here, I've got images of screen reader, we have ergonomic keyboards and Braille keyboards. Braille keyboards at the top there, where it's attached to the computer. The screen reader voiceover will announce everything that's on the screen in real time. At the same time, the Braille pins move up and down in real time. So someone is also listening, but also reading in Braille. And that's how my friend prefers to do it. Zoom magnification software to zoom in like a magnifying glass directly on one area of the website page. Eye tracking software. And then here we have a captionist who is a stenographer typing out everything that's being said at a live event. All the speakers you get that real-time captioning. Dark mode I mentioned, and then built-in accessibility features like ERA or Be My Eyes leverages the camera on someone's phone. So if I'm in the shop and I'm blind and I want to buy a cookie at Tim Hortons, I can quickly in real time, open the video, and then it's attached to, and go onto the app, and it's attached to a live agent who is sighted. I move my camera around, and they say, oh, the cookies are right in front of you, then you can ask. Or my friend, again, my colleague uses it regularly when he travels with us for work, or used to. When he lands in a new city, he asks for Be My Eyes or ERA, which are those goggles that he wears, to have that person, that live agent who can see, help him navigate the airport or walk down the street to get him to his hotel. So there's a lot of fascinating and exciting adaptive AT and strategies there that already exist. So let's rise to the occasion and work with them to design for them. And then, the WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative, is the department within the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, www. They are the ones that publish the WCAG guidelines for companies and globally laws around the world. But they also have these amazing, helpful, useful resources for graphic designers, UX designers, developers, and content authors on how to meet those needs. And, so there's about, I think there are 9 1-minute long videos. I highly recommend I've got the link here that I can share, of course, afterwards. But I highly recommend you take a look and watch someone navigate and see what they need. So these are design-focused sort of best practices that you can take away. And then just moving to the next slide, I highly recommend the WAI resources. I'm slightly biased because I actively contribute to them because I know they're so important. So those web accessibility perspective videos, and just jumping down to the bottom of the screen here, there's WAI diverse abilities and barriers. If you ever want to go back and find out what graphic designers need to do in order to make their designs accessible, there's a breakdown there, as well as some other resources I can share with you. There's also user stories. If you've never really kind of fully understood or haven't had met anyone with those needs before, the user stories can really be helpful. And then just in the middle here, we have the government, the UK government. Their graphics department created these do's and don'ts on designing for accessibility posters. So simple, you just print them out, or you can have them as PDFs, access them anytime. But there was simple, here's what to do to design for dyslexia. Here's what not to do. Here's what to do for those with low vision. Here's what not to do. They're really helpful. And then finally, if we are working, if you're building beautiful graphics, icons, images, and they have meaning on the web page, you want them to have meaning. For people who can't see them, that person would also want to know what the meaning is. So we have, alt text or text. Our content author, or you would provide this yourself. Does this image need a text alternative? Is it just sort of simply decorative, a beautiful, elegant piece in the background, or does it have meaning? You can use this alt decision tree link. You land and you answer a few questions, and it can help guide you for that piece. All right, and then quickly, hopefully we're not losing too much time. This is my action plan. So we've covered people and needs, the facts, what we're doing and why, getting really excited to gain empathy and understanding. And then how do we apply it to the work that we are doing or already do? So if you want to look at one of your mock-ups, or I'm old, I think mock-ups are still used, or sort of visual design system presentations, anything that you're going to consider as a visual design, take the let's do a team exercise or a solo exercise to, number one, familiarize yourself with user needs. Use those resources I mentioned to look at the physical, visual, auditory, cognitive, and speech needs. Familiarize yourself with the do's and don'ts. And then I'll do this with teams in a workshop that we do, review your current design. So as I say, develop those personas or profiles based on those needs from each of the disability types. Ensure you have a good combination of those. And if you can, engage with real people at any time to get them to take a look at the designs or share their thoughts with you. And then it always helps to walk through the design that you've created. And then look, like, is your design creating a barrier for any type of user at the moment? Or, maybe not an interactive layout at the moment, but you have the way you've designed it, you're intending for that button to, link out to another page, or you're intending for that section to, collapse section to expand. Knowing a little bit of the interaction, just extend your thinking. Is that accessible by, how do we make sure that's accessible by keyboard? Or make a note of it, as I say. If not, it's time to rethink, redesign, and rewrite some of those things. And we do that a lot of the time in an agile way, in a really iterative, minimum viable product way, where we're constantly looking back and changing small things and tweaking things to make them better. So The last piece is that some updates require collaboration, obviously. If you've built some graphic design, but you want to know what labels the alt text should include or instructions should be included, you might want to collaborate with a content author or do it yourself. And then use this role-based decision tree. My big thing is this amazing project within the W3C that we were working on called the Accessibility Roles and Responsibilities Mapping Methodology. So yeah, if you really want to do it in a formalized way to continue on to really deep dive into your own designs or your own tasks. So once you've realized, uh-oh, I think the contrast is insufficient for this particular graphic or this particular text. I think by this point, as a practitioner, you'll know that's your responsibility. However, this exercise is designed if you're collaborating with others on an overall design for a website or social media or a video. So you have the tasks at hand. We know that we have work to do with accessibility. Do this checkpoint exercise. So is the task that we need to do driven by business or non-functional requirements, like some sort of high level, we need to make things accessible? No, 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 no. I imagine we'll skip that part. We're going to go next to whether or not it's a visual design decision or a consideration. Yes. Content author, UX design, development. Is it a testing, something that needs to be tested? We go through this process of elimination as a team to hold our hand up and say, yeah, actually, I know that the visual design needs to be changed. I need to tweak that color, that gray that's insufficient for that low vision user. I need to update that value, that color value, or create a new color combination. So yeah, so it's just one of those sort of team exercises that you can put your hand up and say, I'll own that, I will fix that. And then if no one's put their hand up by the end at number 7, then it becomes a project management concern. We don't have anyone owning a color palette for accessibility, or nobody's owning video transcripts, or who's going to be responsible for making PDFs accessible to screen readers, or have headings and color and things like that. So it's really kind of an exciting exercise. I'd love for you as champions to bring into organizations to say, hey, let's do this team exercise, and let's do that action plan exercise to co-design and look at what barriers might be caused by our current designs at the design stage, not the development or post-publishing stage where not a lot can be done. And then document it all so you can share your learnings. And then, yeah, as I say, share your learnings in your accessibility hub, like a center of excellence where all your great tips and tricks and best practices lie and are shared. Create those profiles, create user stories of your own, a pattern library, your style guides, and interaction design systems. All of those, incorporate those best practices for accessibility, bake those in, and then you'll never forget them and they won't be overlooked. So successful ways, finally, to be a champion in your organization. These are the successful ones, and I've listed IBM, Microsoft, the BBC. Really amazing editorial and graphic style guide from BBC, by the way. Amazon, Google, Apple, and then like the CDS, the Canadian Digital Service, and the Government of Canada, I cite as champions. All of these have those things in common. They've established a culture of empathy and inclusion. They set up an accessibility standard for themselves. So let's say we're going to meet WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, to version 2.1. Of the 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA, let's say AA. That's usually the norm. We're going to commit to act to this. We're going to allocate budget, training. We're going to enhance our skill set. We're going to create a center of excellence. We're going to assign roles and responsibilities so people feel empowered and accountable and own the accessibility piece that they're responsible for. Have an accessibility statement that we share out to a team, out to the public, to say, hey, here, wherever we're at an organization, or you as a practitioner, graphic practitioner, I'm an inclusive designer. Involve people with disabilities into the design development phase, nothing about us without us, and then employ people with disabilities as you can. That's one of the fundamental principles of the AODA in Ontario, specifically the Act, is that by 2025, we would have people with all diverse abilities in our workforce. And that is so important. All right, that's a lot from me. I hope I'm at time. I'll just turn it over, yes, to questions either in QA or in Menti. Is that right? But thank you.
Yes. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much. That was very insightful, and I think we can learn quite a bit from what you had to say. We will now move on to our Q&A. I did see one an earlier asking what the importance of dark mode was. So if you can just explain that a little bit further.
Of course. Yeah, so dark mode is usually it's an application that someone will have on, so there's two ways to do it. There's software, my friend Corb has low vision, he's got limited sight, so he uses dark mode. So he'll land on a web page, and on his own side, on his own browser, he'll have a plugin or a piece of software that will automatically flip the whole website from, white with a background with black text or colors, to dark mode version, where you just make the white black and inverse the colors. So that can be done on his end, or this is not necessarily a direct responsibility maybe for anyone here, but you can use CSS, or the cascading style sheet, to code that. So I think it's both, yeah. So if you code that so your website is dark mode ready with all those provisions and settings, yeah. If when Corb lands on your particular site and decides to enable dark mode, you've got it there. It's for low vision users to just amplify the contrast to a degree. And also, I don't know, sure there's statistics and research, but those with cognitive needs and ADHD sometimes it's easier to have a dark background. So yeah, so it's the user taking control of your designs, which is a new concept sometimes. When I was a graphic designer, it took me a while over the course of my career to let go a little bit, right? Yeah, but it's critical, like it's an essential need for people with disabilities sometimes. Yeah.
Wonderful. I know I prefer dark mode just in general, so I can only imagine how helpful it is to those who really need that. We have another question here. If all designers could make one change in their work moving forward, what would you recommend? Make it more accessible.
Yeah, no, one change, there's the attitudinal change, or like one attitude is one thing, but then what I would encourage is when change in their work or their process, yes, is to use the little plugins to that sort of mirror contrast, like dark mode. Just check your own, check your own beautiful designs in dark mode to make sure they're still as beautiful and useful. Leverage plugins that show you the color contrast, but color blindness settings. So forgive me, there are three main ones, medical models, but yeah, you can check to see if your design is, what it looks like for someone with color blindness. It goes completely grayscale. So there's little processes or little tips and tricks you can go along, but just don't just assume that everyone is going to experience the graphics and visuals exactly how you see them. You just have to be aware of that, and then kind of, work and extend your design eye to include those things. So I'm happy to chat about that and provide some resources directly. But yeah, attitudinally, it's just to remember that not everyone sees what you see. And if someone doesn't see it all is not lost. You work together to create meaningful descriptions of your visuals with maybe a content author, that kind of thing. I hope that helps. Yeah, there's a lot you can do.
I can see in the chat very positive feedback. For sure. Yeah, very useful, very insightful. Absolutely. I can attest to that myself. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. That's going to wrap up our time for today. We will get in touch with you about any unanswered questions that our audience members do have. And I believe we have all of your links as well after our post program goes out there for everyone. So thank you so much.
Thanks. And I think you've got my contact info, either on the slides or, please.
Yes,
please do reach out to me. I'd love to chat. Thanks, Liz, and thanks team
Wonderful.
for everything. All right.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jennifer.